Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on payment in NDC. We're super happy to see so many registrations and people keep dialing in. So I'll go to a slow start and give people a few seconds to enter. Payment, we know payment can be a pain point for many people, and there's a lot of question marks around payment, and so is NDC. So we thought, why not bring two of these pain point topics together? Not in order to create more question marks, but hopefully to enlighten you a little bit. And for that, we have two excellent panelists here today with me. You see them on the screen already. We have Esperanza Fernandez. She is Director Business Development for Mastercard. She's talking to airlines every day. She understands the payment industry. She understands the travel industry. And she is our expert of the day. So welcome to Esperanza. And her counterpart will be Marco Sequeira, COO of Alive Travel, a TMC which is active in 4 countries across 2 continents and serving 10,000 plus corporate customers. And he's also very well aware of the payment pain points, the payment solutions in place. And we're very happy that Marco is here with us today, being able to discuss with Esperanza. My part will be quite short. I would like to let you know that you can type in your questions. If you want to raise questions, we will start with an exchange between Esperanza and Marco and then take up questions as they come in towards the end of the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded. So if your peers are not able to attend right now, you can later on listen to the recorded webinar in the webinar section on our website. And now I would like to get started, and I would like to hand over to Esperanza, but I would like to ask 2 questions, and hopefully Esperanza will be able to take it up on her part. So first of all, what are the main friction points observed in NDC flows from a payments perspective? That's something that I would like to understand a little bit more, and I think the audience as well. And also, what are some of the best practices that you, as an expert, would recommend to reduce such friction and to improve the sales conversion? Maybe you find some answers on that. And now I will mute myself. Welcome, everyone, and have a good session.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, so in order to answer those 2 questions, I think it would make sense to set, first of all, a little bit the scene, and not knowing exactly the level of understanding of our audience today in terms of how GDS payments work versus NDC payments work, I would like to share just a couple of slides explaining the differences in the flows, and then we can explain what are those nuances that we see, what is the friction, what are some of the challenges. I think it's easier to illustrate with a couple of slides, right? So I'm going to be sharing my screen. Let me know when it's available. All right. Okay. So we call it navigating NDC payments, challenges and opportunities, because yes, there are some challenges, but there's also some opportunities here to optimize those payment flows, right? Just a little bit of a disclaimer. Obviously, this is Mastercard data, slides, and information, so please do not circulate or outside of the webinar today. So, okay, to explain a little bit how it works, we're going to start with the basic of the traditional GDS EDIFACT flows. And for those who don't know really how it works, it's very simple, right? So you have a traveler interacting with a travel agency. And here we're talking about different flavors of travel agencies. It can be an online travel agency, a TMC, a travel agency in the high street, all of them. Basically, the agent will take the car details, the PAN number, etc., and through the GDS will pass those car details, and the GDS will manage the authorization process, the authorization request. The GDSs, such as Sabre, Travelport, Amadeus, even Travel Sky, they have connections with the schemes like Visa and ourselves and the others as well. And they will send the transaction directly to us. We will send the transaction to the issuing bank requesting the authorization. When the authorization is completed, we send back the confirmation message, and then is when the GDS will tell the travel agency, okay, transaction has been confirmed, now you can print the ticket, right? So that is an authorization flow where the airline is not present, and the interaction is between the traveler and the travel agencies, okay? This is how it has always been. And the important piece of information here is that these flows traditionally has been assigned as MOTO channel. MOTO meaning mobile order, telephone order. We all know this is not over the phone, obviously, but it's the way that the airline industry has been operating for the last, let's say, 40 years, right? So all transactions, independently on whether the travel agency is online or not, all the transactions were designed or defined as MOTO channel. Okay, so now we have a different scenario where we enter into the new NDC world. So we still have the traveler interacting with a travel agency, but now, as you can see in the picture, there's no GDS anymore. The interaction between the travel agency and the airline is direct. In some cases, we're going to see NDC aggregators, but what we have learned so far is that none of these NDC aggregators are actually managing the payment process themselves. They're just simply passing the card details, the information, etc. So what happens today is that the travel agencies, in front of the cardholders, in front of the travelers, may have to do 3DS authentication in some cases, right? Depending on the markets, on the regions. Oops, excuse me, sorry, my screen. Depending on the markets and the regions, they may have to do the 3DS authentication. If that is the case, the expectation is for the travel agency to pass the cryptogram from the authentication together with the PAN details to the airline. And here is where the complexity comes into the picture, because obviously the airline is going to receive this transaction through their PSP or gateway, and they will have, sorry, excuse me, I keep on getting all those messages. So basically the acquirer will manage the authorization request. And here is one of the main differences that we've seen in the industry so far, is that some airlines are deciding that this flow is going to be e-commerce flow. Some other airlines have decided to keep the flow as MOTO channel, okay? There's no right or wrong here, but the decision on whether you do e-com or MOTO has consequences from approval rates perspective, also from the requirements in terms of security of the transaction, etc. So it's an important decision that has to be considered by the airlines when they set up their NDC flows. One of the challenges, and here is to answer Christian's first question, is the airline may not necessarily know, especially when there is an NDC aggregator in between, if the travel agency behind the scenes is an online travel agency or is an offline travel agency, right? They also don't necessarily receive the cryptogram from the authentication if they are assuming this transaction is e-commerce and the cryptogram and the authentication is not there, there's going to be declines. There are cases as well where the airlines would expect certain additional security elements like CVC2, which is the number on the back of the car, that in some cases the travel agencies are not able to pass. Sometimes they don't even have it if it's like a launch car, right? That also creates friction. When we say friction, we mean higher percentages of declines, because the information that is sent to request the authorization to the issuing bank is not necessarily complete. So this is the picture in terms of the main differences. I have already described a little bit of the nuances and a little bit of the challenges. So very quickly, we can also review some of the best practices that we usually recommend, right? So there's different things here. First of all, the first recommendation is for travel agencies and airlines to discuss about the payment part when they have NDC conversations, right? We feel that this is something that is not all the time on the front of the conversation. It's more about the commercials or the API integrations and all those things, which is fine. But I think payments is important because at the end of the day, this is the sales enablement. You can set up a fantastic ecosystem, but if you don't get paid, you're not really selling, right? So first of all, discuss with the travel agencies about your payments. The second thing that we always recommend to the airlines is separate the flows that you receive from NDC from your own direct sales channels. You can do e-com or you can do moto, that's fine. But the question is, do not mix up what's coming from NDC with your ATO CTOs, with your call centers, with your website. Separate the traffic, because that way you can track the performance. You can spot problems. You can take action if you detect those problems fairly quickly. If all the transactions come into the same bucket, and it's a very large bucket like your own, let's say, website, it's going to be very difficult to spot the problems and try to fix them, right? So again, second recommendation, separate the NDC flows from the rest. What else do we recommend? Well, we always recommend to review your policy about, is this e-commerce, is this moto? Review your security policy or strategy as well, right? Security on an e-commerce transaction is very different than on a moto transaction, right? You may need different data elements. You may need different information. Check whether you receive that sort of information from the travel agencies. And again, going back to the discussion and conversation between travel agents and airlines, they need to have this type of discussions so the travel agencies know what is expected from them. What are they supposed to be passing? What data elements and what level of data they need to pass. This is something that travel agencies need to understand. This is what we always tell the airlines. Then the final one that we tell travel agencies and airlines is, in this ecosystem where there is obviously the interaction between the cardholder and the travel agency, it's worthwhile considering whether the travel agency could be the merchant of record of that first transaction with the cardholder. That way they can manage any authentication, fraud checks. They can provide a smooth customer experience. They can provide or offer perhaps different payment elements or payment methods that are not available for the airline to process by themselves, right? So always consider that piece, making the travel agency the merchant of record, and then you can pay the airline with a virtual card afterwards. That's one of the recommendations that we always discuss as well with the airlines. So I'm going to stop here because I've been chatting for a long time, and maybe we can. I will stop sharing if that's okay. And then now that we have Marco, and this is a great opportunity to discuss also the travel agency perspective, right? Because what I have described here, or what I have explained here, is almost the airline perspective from a payments picture, right? So how do they operate, and how are the challenges for them? But let's discuss with Marco his own view about NDC, right? So my first question to Marco would be whether you have actually experienced any of these challenges when you process transactions on an NDC versus the GDS traditional flows.
Hi, good afternoon, guys. Nice to see you all here. Yeah, Esperanza. In fact, most of these items we have already sensed them during the workflow, and even more. The route is to sense them even more as long as NDC adoption increases in the past couple of months and past couple of years. Because it's much easier to handle a problem when you have like 6 to 15% adoption on NDC, when all of your ecosystem is based on EDIFACT rules, on BSP rules. And so it's not that difficult to manage a small portion of your business when there's a disruption in the market. However, when airlines start pushing even faster towards NDC, and every single one of them basically with a different scheme and a different approach in regards to NDC, so some of them with peer-to-peer, direct connections, direct APIs, others with Astelia, for instance, which works as the technological infrastructure that tries to consolidate all information, or even others through aggregators, through Sabre Mosaic, Amadeus X, Travelport Plus. So you have a lot of different architectures in place with a lot of different
requirements
in regards to what is payments. So we noticed at this time a huge lack of consistency, which is something that has been adamant for the last 20 years. That's what GDS as an EDIFACT brought to this area, was in fact consistency. Of course, it came with issues, it came with limitations, but in terms of a business, and when you're handling a business, consistency is one of the main pillars to which you can deploy your endeavors. So this is something that is getting us a little bit worried for the time being. And I would say that basically consistency is one of the main issues. The way that merchants and PSP differs from issuers' expectancy in regards to the approach of NDC for every single airline. 3D is something that has been an hassle for a long time. It's not the first time, but now with this change, it's even more complicated, especially when you talk, for instance, of corporate travel, but with travel paid by their own employees with their own individual credit cards, because not being a van, you cannot override the 3D. So it's a huge issue for this when you're doing remote transaction. Data mismatches also continue to appear because the workflow is different from airline to airline, and this is also a problem sometimes that creates more declines. And then we have another more technical issue, which is the way that agencies get the contents from NDC. If we get them through a direct connection with the airline through an API, usually it's much more stable in terms of connectivity. But if we are getting it through, for instance, an aggregator, there's, at least for the time being, still a lot of timeouts, error messaging, and troubleshooting. It's much slower than it was in the old days of EDIFACT and GDS dominance.
Yeah, I can imagine. So basically, added complexity and inconsistency is what is creating a little bit of a headache for the travel agencies, if I hear what you're saying, right?
A lot of manual labor.
Yeah. And do you experience different challenges with different types of airlines? Like maybe some of the early adopters on NDC have learned faster, or they have a more clear approach, and the newcomers are still struggling. Is that the case, or?
Yes, most definitely. The first that came to markets have a lot of more maturity in terms of their workflow and their approach. They also learned a lot by trial by error. So whenever we made a mistake or the workflow was not working properly, we were able to change it during the course of business and with a lower volume. So the impact is much smaller nowadays when someone wants to enter the market. The ones that also choose an outside architecture to manage their NDC also work a little bit better because it's more standardized. You have more consistency and uniformity in the way you get information and in the workflow of payments. But I sense that a lot of airlines are still joining this right now just as kind of a fab, you know. They don't have an exact program, an exact objective of what they're trying to get. And this also creates a lot of difficulties for us because even when we have to make that integration with all our back office systems and our environments, the thing is when you have to connect one cable, it's one thing. When you have to connect 150 cables, it's much more complicated. And that's one of
Absolutely.
the big problems that we have right now.
And scale, right? Because getting into a point where you need 100 airlines doing things differently is not sustainable over time. But in your conversations with the airlines, when you're discussing with them about, okay, we're going to establish an NDC connection, or maybe it's only through an aggregator, or maybe directly, is payment part of that conversation? Has always been, or at the beginning nobody was talking about payments, but now it's part of the conversation.
Yeah,
all right.
At the beginning, nobody was talking about it. This was such a disruption that everybody was worried about commercials, integration, investment on tools, what we would need to continue our business. This was the main focus. As we are seeing the adoption rates grow and more airlines getting to this ecosystem, it starts to get a problem because the volume increases, the issues increase, our back office team starts going crazy with all the manual labor they have to do and all the investment in technology in order to reconcile all these flows and all these transactions. And so now we are trying to do it. I must confess, it's not been easy because even the airlines themselves, it's not something they really want to talk about it right now. They just want to move, start doing NDC adoption, and we'll see it later how it works. And I imagine that for them, it might work like this.
Well, at some point, sorry to interrupt you here. At some point, they will have to come back and have the payments conversation with you because you, as I said, you can set up your very pretty NDC ecosystem, but if you don't get the money and you are not paid, then obviously it's not working, and then is when the airlines need to start revisiting the payments part. It's a little bit surprising that they're not putting this at the front of the conversation because payments is the sales enablement. But okay, at least at some point they will come on the conversation. But on those discussions that you're having now with some of the airlines, are they telling you specifically what sort of data you have to pass for them to complete the payment? What card types are you expected to use? How are you expected to do 3DS? Are they giving you all that level of detail?
Yes, so some of the airlines, yes, and we were working even in order for them to provide options. It's not like they take over the model, but they can give us some suggestions in regards to some issuers or some payment solutions that might be used and be more adequate to their model. This is also important for us because I think this can be a good opportunity for travel agencies, for airlines, and also for the owners like Mastercard of the cards that are issued. And why? First of all, because even in your model, when you were showing the difference between the workflows on NDC and EDIFACT GDS, one thing they can get right now is get their money sooner because you don't have like a clearinghouse, you don't have like, so they can have their funds much sooner. So this for them, it's a good opportunity. We just have to align models. We have to align refunds, voids, reissues, post-booking scenarios, how this is going to be handled, because it's another ballgame when we get to the parts of reissues and refunds of those tickets. How it's going to work, it's still a bit sketchy, but I think it's going to be very, very important for you, for companies like Mastercard also, because I see here a business opportunity, for example, for one group or one airline to say, well, we did an amazing deal with Mastercard. We have a fantastic merchant fee for you guys. This is very acceptable for us. And if you enter this scheme, you can have a much smoother operation from beginning to end. And this will drive adoption on the side of TMCs and other travel agencies. So I think the payments industry, which is one of those who has risen more in the last years, that's why you're having so much corporations apart from legacy like Mastercard. Now you have Stripe, you have Adyen, you have Outpace, you have Voxel, you have even the GDSs are getting into that business. So it's a booming business right now, and I think there's opportunities here for all of us to do a little bit better.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And obviously we're not discussing commercials here today. It's more about just the flows to optimize approval
Sure.
rates, which is at the end the key objective for the entire industry, and reduce fraud, right? So all those two elements have to be combined to get
For sure.
the optimal payment flow, right? But is there right to say then that in your mind, you as a travel agency being the merchant of record, managing that payment with the consumer, with the traveler,
Yeah.
and then paying the airline on the back, does it facilitate your life a little bit rather than passing the
Yes.
details of the card to the airline?
Yeah, for sure. We have been doing that for a long time with a specific type of corporate clients mainly. And in terms of workflow, it's much better. It's more stable. We have proven payment acceptance tags, established fraud controls, smoother customer support when a payment fails. So on that area, it works much better, and it's much better aligned. Of course, this comes with trade-offs and with some
Yep.
possible liabilities also,
Yeah.
because chargeback exposure, it
Yep.
increases for us, more liabilities, more responsibility in refund timing, disputes, consumer protection. So this is kind of a trade-off, but I think it's a trade-off that if your business is more adapted to that workflow, I think it's a trade-off that we can accept, because the kind of stability that gives you and the kind of efficiency that you can take out from this model, it's much higher than being just in the wild and crossing our fingers and hoping for the best. So
Right.
this has been proven, this as a track record, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to enter this path also.
And as a industry collectively, because we're all part of the same boat and we all have
Yeah.
the same objective, right? Which is get sales conversion and reduce fraud. Do you think that there is something that as an industry we could be doing together and working better and collaborate perhaps a little bit more? And not only obviously travel agencies, but also airlines, perhaps IATA, the schemes like ourselves, or payment processors. How do you think that we could collaborate and get all on the same page here?
I think you said one of the main words and mottos of whenever you have a disruption: collaboration. And what we have seen, at least for the most part, I'm not talking about all situations, all cases, but what we have seen in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, it's been mainly a lack of collaboration. Usually what happens is airlines decide to do something, and they inform the market that they have decided to do something. And travel agents on the other side try to adapt to their main vendor and their main provider, and try to adapt their systems to those to those requirements from the airlines. And to be honest, even with merchants and with financial corporations, I don't think that the conversation, particularly between airlines and them, is not as intimate as it should be. I think when we do a market disruption, it would be much wise for the entire markets and for the prosecution of your goals. It's not to undermine your efforts, but it's to at least try to get a more across-the-board solution. So, and we noticed this, for instance, some of the airlines approached TMCs when they were discussing NDC. It's not that they listen to everything, but at least they listen to our opinion. And sometimes they're a bit outside of the real market, you know, because they don't know their client exactly the same way as we do. Especially when we're talking about high-value clients, corporate clients, etc. We're not talking about OTAs because it's a different environment, but in corporate clients, there's a lot of things that they didn't do. I'll give you a very quick 20-second example. When they said, well, I don't understand why you cannot change tomorrow for NDC if the price is cheaper than on EDIFACT. And you say, yeah, of course, I know you don't understand. But the thing is, when we work with the corporate accounts, with the big multinational corporation, we have duty of care, we have reporting, we have invoicing, we have a lot of details that where are we going to put that information? If we don't have our legacy system to queue a PNR to ISIS or to another duty of care global company, or if we don't have that PNR to queue it to GRASP reporting or to iBank or whatever, how are we going to comply with the requirements of the scope of work that we have for their clients? And they don't know this exists because, unfortunately for us, and good for them because they live well with that part, we travel agencies do 85% of that work. So they don't have to bother with that. Don't have to bother that nowadays corporations are starting to request a lot of credit accounts all over Europe, for instance, that didn't occur 15 years ago. Most of them paid with corporate credit cards. Nowadays it's shifting. Who has the weight of that financial area? The TMC.
So maybe these conversations around NDC and the discussions that you're having with the different airlines, maybe it's also a good opportunity for the travel agencies as an industry to demonstrate in a much wider way or a deeper way the value that you bring to the ecosystem, and also by managing the payments part, how you can facilitate those stays. Because it is true that when we discuss with airlines about payments, for example, the people on the payment side is usually either in finance or in the e-commerce and sales department, because they've been managing the payments on their own website and call centers and so on. But they don't necessarily know much about travel agency distribution. The GDSs were doing the hard work of the authorization for them. So they are not necessarily familiar with all those things. So again, maybe this is an opportunity for the whole ecosystem to collaborate further and show that value that you bring to the ecosystem as a travel agency, facilitating that sort of hard, difficult part, which is the sales conversion, right? Cool. One final question that I had is like, have you observed with different airlines that they ask you about different payment methods to be used on those flows? Like, are there any particular airlines that are telling you, I prefer that you are the merchant of record, you take care of that payment, and then you can pay me with a virtual card? Or are they airlines that are telling you, no, I still want you to pay me with BSP cash? Or are there different flavors out there still in the market?
In the markets where we have direct presence, definitely it leans more towards using the traditional BSP cash, or to use the airlines itself as the merchant of record and not ourselves. Even the wave that usually comes from IATA also comes in this direction. That's why whenever a travel agency wants to use their own credit cards, for instance, to pay, they have to register it on IATA and wait for an approval, which is something that, to be honest, to me, it doesn't make that much sense, because apparently we are second-class citizens, because everybody can use a credit card to pay a ticket, exception made if you're a travel agency. So this for me doesn't make sense. But regardless of that, I think that's what I can tell you, Esperanza, and with a good note for the future, is that we are noticing, especially in the last probably 6 to 12 months, an apparently shift in the mindset of airlines. They are a bit more open to discuss these issues. We had several issues that were never discussed in the past, and nowadays they are opening the door to at least listen to our ideas and listen to our pain points. And I think this is working in the right direction. And as you very well put it, I think this can be an opportunity to start growing more together, grow more aligned, getting less declines, less fraud, do a better risk mitigation if we all work together and row on the same direction. And I think the signs that they are showing right now are much better than the ones they showed a couple of years ago. And I think that's positive. So we have to focus on positive things.
There's hope. Okay, we are all positive then.
Sure.
Everybody's navigating into the right direction. Okay, we all know and accept that obviously NDC is a massive transformation, is a radical change from what everybody has known for the last 40 years. And this is a revolution, and revolutions usually take some time to get into the right space, right? So I would say that we are all learning as we go. We are in a transition phase. Airlines are learning. Schemes, we are also learning. IATA, travel agencies, and so on. So that's why I want to reinforce the message about collaboration. And I know that there's a lot of people on the audience that maybe travel agencies, that they may have a lot of challenges these days around these topics and these issues, and they feel a little bit lost and they don't know how to navigate the complexities. So definitely Mastercard is trying to help. We are having this type of webinars. We're having interactions with travel agency associations. We also work with IATA. We also work with the airlines. So don't feel completely lost out there for the guys in the audience. Reach out to different entities, travel agency associations, or even IATA, that may help to navigate the difficulties. And as I said, always discuss with the airlines as well. Ask them, how do we do the payment? What do you want from us? How much data do we have to pass on? What if I am the merchant of record and we eliminate some of this friction? These type of conversations are definitely needed, I think. And I don't know, Christian, if there are any a lot of questions on the audience that we want to take. I'm conscious of time, but
yes. I just wanted to jump in there. There are actually two questions, and I didn't want to interrupt in the beginning, but one question was actually just in the beginning. When you mentioned, you say, the question is, you say that airlines call their NDC transactions e-com or moto by default. They don't, and the question is, don't they use the actual indicators sent by the seller in the NDC message to the airline?
Right. So some airlines are doing everything e-com, some airlines are doing everything moto. It's their choice. I don't think they received any specific indicator from the travel agencies. I think that indicator was not even present on the first versions of NDC that were released years ago. So some of the airlines that were the pioneers, let's say the first airlines coming into this NDC world, they didn't even think about having that sort of indicator. So they just decided all the transactions are going to be e-com, all the transactions are going to be moto. What we see now is that this is something that I think IATA is thinking about, and I'm not sure whether the indicator about whether this is an e-com transaction or sorry, an e-com travel agency or a more physical travel agency. I think that indicator has been put in place. I don't know whether airlines are using that version of NDC where that indicator can be displayed and used, because one of the things that Marco was referring to at the beginning is the complexity, right? Every airline is doing things differently because there is no mandate today for airlines to be all on the same NDC version. Every airline has their different, let's say, journey and timelines to upgrade to more recent NDC verbs and NDC versions. So you can have cases where an airline is on a version that was released 2 or 3 years ago, and you have airlines that are joining the NDC world these days with the most recent version. So you have a whole variety of options in there. And there's no mandate, as I said, to be all on the same latest version, which creates that complexity and that friction that Marco was referring to. Every airline is asking me for something completely different, right? And then what we also observed is that some airlines that are now coming into the picture, they have realized that setting up NDC as e-commerce creates more friction, just because in a lot of markets, when you do an e-commerce transaction, you have to do 3DS authentication, right? So we're talking about obviously Europe, where we're also talking about markets like Singapore, Japan, India, many others, right? Where 3DS is mandatory by law. So when you do e-commerce transaction, you are adding that friction element. So what we see is that a lot of airlines these days are setting up their NDC flows as Moto, just to replicate a little bit how the GDSs were processing those transactions. It creates less challenges on 3DS, but then of course you still have other issues out there, right? Like CBC2 numbers, like the fact that this is something that we always say, the retrial strategy, right? So imagine a situation where the transaction gets declined for whatever reason. It can be simply insufficient funds, right? But how that message flows back to the travel agency and decides what's the action against that decline. Because you can also have a decline for suspected fraud. So the action in that case should be different, right? Should be do not try again, stop the transaction. If it's insufficient funds, the action is, okay, maybe the guy wants to try again. So that message flow, that response and that recommendation to act upon the decline may not necessarily reach the travel agencies in the right way. The issuer declining the transaction passes that message to us. We pass the message to the acquiring from the airline. And then we just don't know what happens after that, right? So the airline needs to set up that sort of retrial strategy with the travel agencies. But, it's very difficult because I'm not sure whether the travel agencies are feasible or technically capable of receiving those messages and then decide how they're going to be interacting with the cardholder that they have in front of them. That's the problem. The cardholder, the passenger, the traveler, it's with the travel agency, not with the airline. So managing the payment flow like that, it's difficult. There is a broken link over there, right? So that's why we said that being the merchant of record for the travel agency, managing that payment with the traveler that they're interacting with, it's easier. You do that first payment and then you can pay the airline in the back of your systems afterwards with a virtual card, right? That eliminates a lot of those challenges. And that's what some airlines are already doing. So we have examples, and I'm not going to mention names, but some of the large airlines outside of Europe, they feel that friction from the 3DS and even potential fraud and all that, because they have a very high transaction value, being airlines outside of Europe, they've pretty much decided to be paid with a virtual card. And again, there's no right or wrong here. Different airlines will do different things. As I said, everybody's learning as we go, which is interesting because it's very dynamic at the moment. Hopefully, in a few years' time, things will settle down and then there will be more clear guidelines in terms of what works, what doesn't work, what is the preference for the whole ecosystem, right? Because as Marco was saying, I think there is a feeling out there that the airlines are imposing, this is what I want, this is what I need, not necessarily listening to what the travel agencies can actually do or what are their own needs, right? So I think there is more space for dialogue and collaboration in the future, definitely. And as Marco said as well, the more volume that we have on NDC, when things scale even further, then these things will happen naturally because it has to, right? Otherwise, the whole system will implode. So definitely collaboration will be key.
Yeah, that's indeed something that we keep hearing frequently. And it was actually good to hear from Marco that there seems to be really a change, that this message that payments should be part of the conversations that travel intermediaries and agents and airlines have frequently around other topics anyway, to include this important topic there as well. There's one more question just popped in the chat, which is tokenization a challenge in NDC and for travel agents?
It is, because here again, you are asking the travel agency to tokenize a transaction for a merchant that is not there, right? So it is a challenge. So yeah, there is a lot of work in Mastercard with our tokenization experts to define the flows of how that sort of tokenization could work on an NDC environment. Up until now, we've been working a lot on tokenization on the airlines direct sales on their e-commerce frontline. Okay, we've also been working on tokenization on a GDS environment, and we've been working with the main GDSs out there, just to how to make it work, kind of like marketplace sort of scenario. And the next level that we are exploring and discussing is the NDC flows. So yeah, there are challenges that have to be considered, but all the challenges that we see are related to the same problem, which is the customer is with the travel agency, not with the merchant, right? And the travel agency is acting on behalf of the merchant, facilitating the booking, the payment, and all these things, but they are not the merchant themselves, and that generates definitely problems.
Thanks, Esperanza. Marco, you want to add something on that question? Otherwise, I have another one as well.
Basically, it's what Esperanza said. Most of these situations will create not obstacles, because I think obstacle it's a very hard word sometimes, but it will create some bumps in the road. Talking about tokenization, talking about the entry of different currencies, talking about interstate or interborder or cross-border transactions. You have a lot of things happening now in the market. A lot of different options are rising. Some of them are not even that well regulated, or with different regulations if we're talking about Americas, or if we're talking about European Union. So there's a lot of things to be done here for the next couple of years. I think you guys and ACTA as a body of work and a body of European travel agencies has been in the forefront of this situation. And I believe that you guys can have a position of establishing a clear guideline, at least through the European space, of what can be either in terms of legal framework, either in terms of operational scope for airlines or for travel agencies, can be done in the near years. And I think you must be a part of the conversation, and an active part of the conversation that brings all these areas together.
Thank you, Marco. I have two more questions there now slowly popping in. So one question is, are not MOTO transactions more expensive than e-com for the airline because of higher interchange and scheme fees?
The answer is yes. It's not because of the interchange, by the way. It's because of the scheme fees. So yes, MOTO transactions are slightly more expensive than e-com. Having said that, when you add into the picture on an e-commerce flow things like the 3DS, the additional fraud checks that you may have to do, ABS and all these things, and when you also consider the volume of declines that you get on an e-commerce transaction versus the volume of declines that you're going to get on MOTO, is probably more cost effective. But yes, there is a small fee on top of the MOTO transactions. The reason, in case somebody is asking, is because outside of the airline industry, MOTO transactions are more risky from a fraud perspective, right? So the idea that schemes have, and again, this is not only Mastercard, but I think the industry as a whole, is reduce as much as possible the motor flows as such. In fact, a lot of call centers these days, a lot of office on the phone, etc., what they're doing is they're sending a link to the card holder to complete the payment online, rather than taking the card details over the phone, which, as you can imagine, is not very secure, right? So the volume of motor transactions outside of the airline industry is getting reduced, so it's going in the right direction. The idea is to help to reduce fraud, because that's the other thing. When you put security measures such as 3DS and all these things on the e-commerce channel, the fraudsters will find the weakest link, and they will move to other channels where they can continue doing their scams and their fraud, right? So over the last few years, when 3DS was introduced, for example, in Europe, a lot of the fraud went into call centers, offices on the phone, and all that. So again, the idea is somehow trying to get away from the motor channel. Now, in the airline industry, in the travel industry, we have a very different scenario because of the third-party distribution through travel agencies, right? So moving away from the motor channel, it's difficult. It brings a lot of friction, as we have explained today, right? So in the case of the industry, of the airline industry, motor channel is going to stay there for a while, for sure.
Thanks, Esperanza. Another question, how difficult is it for the airline/platform/NDC to connect their system to the BSP?
Okay, I think what they really maybe are meaning is more to connect to IFG, which is the IATA Financial Gateway. I think this is what they need to connect to check if, for example, that travel agency is going to pay in cash. What is the holding remittance capacity? Is that an authorized agent? Is an IATA agent, and so on? So that connectivity is through what IATA calls IFG, so IATA Financial Gateway. I really don't know how easy or how difficult it is to get that connection, but it's definitely not needed if you only work on car payments. You don't need to check any of those travel agency status within IATA, because you're going to be paid with a car. The moment the car transaction is authorized, the payment is guaranteed. The airline is going to get the payment within 1-2 days, sometimes even less. So there's no risk exposure or the possibility of the travel agency running away with the money, because, as I said, the moment the transaction is authorized, the acquirer or the schemes ourselves, we guarantee the payment to the merchant. So in fact, there's no necessarily the need to establish that connection with IFG. There may be a need in terms of reporting afterwards, perhaps. I don't know so much about those details, so I don't want to say something that is completely incorrect. But from a pure payments perspective, if you are paid with a card, you don't need to.
If I might add, it's exactly what Esperanza was saying, meaning that on a payments perspective, they don't need to do the connection. Most legacy carriers do that connection, and why? Because a lot of travel agencies continue to use the GDS ecosystem, even if it's outside of EDIFACT, which are two different things. So one thing is the GDS, the other one is the EDIFACT. You can use GDS on NDC, and the ones that continue to use GDS on NDC, most legacy carriers do that direct connection in order for us to issue tickets like we were on the bank settlement regular plan. We have our RHC as imposed by IATA. Everything works exactly the same way. It just goes to a different pocket. So it's quite easy for them to do that but not all carriers want to do that. Usually the traditional low-cost carriers don't do that. EasyJet, Ryanair, Transavia, Monarch, etc. And a lot of the Americans also don't want to do that connection. To be perfectly honest, to our side as a TMC, exception made if we get so good deals that all the content, all the costs that we have are exactly the same using a GDS central environment. If that is not the case, it doesn't really matter if it enters through BSP or not. But if that is the case, if you're a travel agency that centers all your environment on GDS, and you don't use any direct connections, any aggregation, any external sources, then the situation basically doesn't change for you. It's basically the same thing that you have right now, just on a different pockets, but it's the same process.
Thank you so much, Marco. At the moment, we don't have any further questions. We have theoretically 5 minutes left. So to all those participants out there, feel free, you can type in your questions unanimous. So don't be shy, type in whatever you need to know. As long as we have Marco and Esperanza on the call, I'm happy to answer. Yeah, at the moment, there is no further questions. I have a few takeaways that I noted for myself. I took a couple of notes. What I understood from the beginning, from Esperanza's start, the recommendation for airlines was to separate the NDC flow from the rest of the flow so that you can identify points of friction easier. And also, one of the takeaways I got was make sure that your agents do understand the level of data that they need to provide. Also quite important to reduce friction. Mentioned it already twice, but include payment in your, when you talk NDC with your airlines, include the important topic of payment anyway. So when you hold conversations, talk and exchange to understand each other's perspective. Also, we do have a shared objective, which is to increase the approval rates and to reduce fraud. I think that's a common goal we all have in the industry. And collaboration was mentioned, how much key it is. Speak to each other. And coming with that, when you speak to each other, you can learn from each other because, as Esperanza rightly said, NDC is a massive transformation, even though it's been around for many years now, but it's still a massive transformation for the industry and for all the players in it. So we all need to learn. And it's best when we can learn from each other. What are the pain points? How can we collaborate better together to achieve our mutual goals? There's one more question who just came in. Are you not worried about what regulators would think on the discussion between Moto and e-com? Don't they want the truth in the transaction labels?
Yes, we definitely we are working with the regulators, and our legal teams are very much involved on especially within the European region where there's discussions about PSD3 and all that. I think sometimes what happens, as in many other cases, is that obviously the regulators want to set up a general framework that they have to, right? But then once they understand some of the nuances and some of the specific challenge of individual industries, they come up with exceptions and things like that. We saw that when they released PSD2 years ago, because suddenly they realized there were scenarios where there was travel, where there was fuel, for example. That's another industry vertical where things get sometimes a little bit complicated. Mobility, transit. So there is a lot of specific sectors, specific industries that require a different treatment. So yes, we know that there is overall thinking or the ideal or the goal to reduce Moto as much as possible, as I said before, because it is true that Moto generates more fraud in general. But I think for the airline industry, there may be some exceptions and some specific regulations that they may be released afterwards. it is true that it would be ideal if it was possible to identify the right channel. Is this an e-commerce transaction from an e-commerce travel agency and so on? But unfortunately, it's not that simple either, because you have a lot of cases where you're going to have an online travel agency with different locations in different markets around the world as a point of sale. But then all the tickets may be printed from somewhere else, right? So they may have a service center where they print all the tickets, and that is how the ticket is reported afterwards, right? So you are going to have a discrepancy between the channel that show on the authorization versus how that ticket may be reported later on. So there's definitely complexities that have to be considered here. So I want to believe that the regulators will listen to some of these specific nuances, and they will try to find a way to make it as smooth as possible.
That's indeed also what we try to do as ACTA, as in our advocacy efforts, to explain the complexities of our industry and to find solutions that really work for the industry beyond the regulation text. So we're slowly running out of time. We have all questions answered, no question open. Slowly, the first people are dropping out because they probably have follow-up meetings.
Other calls.
But what I want to say is thank you, everyone, for making yourself available, especially our two experts. Thank you very much, Esperanza. Thank you very much, Marco. I hope this was somewhat insightful for all of you. The webinar will be available, the recording afterwards. We hope we were able to contribute a little bit to this collaboration thought and this learning from each other. I saw there was really a diverse group of stakeholders on the call representing different groups of stakeholders, airlines, agents, IATA, other. So it was really hopefully a little contribution to the ongoing discussions, and happy to hear that we spread the word. We need to talk about this. We need to collaborate. So thank you very much, everyone, and especially Esperanza and Marco. I hope to see you again at some other webinar. And now I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.